Yes. Hello, welcome everyone. We're welcoming you today to Khaled Hamza's talk on the philosophy of tenderness, and I want to start by starting a bit of a personal statement. Philosophy Association started about 2 years ago with me and Khaled Hamza and Omar and a couple of other enthusiastic philosophy students ready to present philosophy to the AUC community and beyond. And in my year as the Philosophy Association president, we've done a lot. And in the year Khaled Hamza has been the Philosophy Association's president, we've done lots more. And we're ready to do more for you guys. So hopefully this presentation will go as much as possible for you to enjoy. And I present Khaled Hamza. Khaled is currently the current president of the Philosophy Association. And he's a double major in philosophy and data science, a junior in AUC, and a dear colleague of mine, a mentor, a teacher, and a philosopher, first of all. I present Khaled Hamza. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Ahmed, and I feel the same for you. I'm happy that you all could come, and I wish that this talk will be beneficial for you and for me as well. Yani the experience, the discussion, and what could arise from this discussion right here. Yes. So to initialize this discussion, we're here to philosophize about tenderness. But in this philosophizing, we're not really aiming at a certain answer or a certain final state. It's rather the pursuit of a certain meaning regarding the idea or what we understand to be tenderness. But through this pursuit, for the pursuit to actually take place, we have to have some sort of methodology. And this methodology would arise from a preliminary sense that we all have regarding the word tenderness or regarding the idea of tenderness. And it is the fact that it is a human condition. So first of all, we'd like to understand what is a condition. Generally, a condition is a determination of a certain circumstance and context that comes forward as a conditioner. So something that is being conditioned is a determination of this something, of this thing, given a certain circumstance and a certain context which conditions it. So for example, if I hold the can and I press on this can, the intrusions that occur at the place of the pressure, along with the extrusions that happen elsewhere, is a determination of this can, okay? And what I did is the context that conditions it or the circumstance that conditions it. However, tenderness is not the condition of a can per se, it's a condition of a human. So we're precisely looking into the idea of a human condition. So in a way, the can adapts to the circumstance that it has been put in, but the human is attuned to the circumstance or the context to which it has been put in. This attunement or this response happens through a two-dimensional manner, which is being receptive, first of all, like the can receives my hand. However, it's also accustomed and acclimatized to the pressure or to the context or to the circumstance that it has been a subject to. So in this sense, tenderness, for us to have a methodology about the inquiry regarding tenderness, we have to understand that it is a human condition, i.e. it is something which exhibits a certain type of receptivity and a certain type of a customization given a certain context. Yeah, so being attuned is precisely this, is the fact that one is receptive or is aware of something and is accustomed and acclimatized to that thing, to this circumstance. An example of this could be, for example, being scared or fear. For example, if you see a ghost, this would be a circumstance or a situation where one has a certain type of receptivity and a certain type of customization that causes this individual, for example, to run away. We could think of the receptivity at this time as, for example, being uncertain of what this thing is. A goat essentially is something that we don't know. So the receptivity is a receptivity of being uncertain, and the accustomization to this receptivity that dictates a certain way of conducting yourself is, for example, feeling discomfort. And this accustomization causes you, for example, to run away. Yes. However, this discussion does not live up to the methodology that I have in mind, given that there are distinctions here between a circumstance, the individual receiving and being customized, and then the later action. Because in being attuned, actually the circumstance is only a circumstance only insofar as it is received. So for example, if a certain phenomena is not received in a certain manner, it cannot arise or become a circumstance. Similarly, the action cannot become an action or become a response unless this action is the result of a certain a customization that has been dictated by certain receptivity. So in general, all of this is included under the being attuned. It is not necessarily some type of, there is no some type of separation between the circumstance, me, and then the later action towards the world. The substantiation of a circumstance as a circumstance comes from the fact that it is received, and the fact that an action becomes a purposeful action only arises as a result of the fact that I have accustomed myself, given a certain way that I have received the world, or I have received a certain circumstance. So for example, let's apply this on what we think of as tenderness. So tenderness is a certain receptivity, or could be a certain receptivity, and a later a customization of a human being, a human condition. However, for us to go from a certain circumstance to understand the receptivity, there is something that I would like to refer to as circumstantial analysis, where we ask the very simple question of what makes a circumstance a circumstance. And hereby we unveil an understanding of how I received it, because a circumstance only can become a circumstance if it is received in a certain way. The same arises when a purposeful action, an action that has a purpose, comes to being. For me to understand why this action takes place, I need to understand why it has been a prospect in the first place. And this prospectival analysis asks the very simple question of what makes my purpose mine, in the sense that in what way have I been accustomatized and given me the ability to take up this certain prospect or possibility. And yes, these are the definitions, Yani, but it's basically those two questions. What makes the circumstance a circumstance, and what makes a prospect or a purposive action mine or my purposeful action? So as we have described before, here the being attuned is somehow everything together. So in tenderness would include the circumstance which causes certain receptivity, and would include the actions that would arise from it. So in that sense, when we're trying to uncover tenderness in this methodology, we're trying to let this type of attunement, which we call tenderness, to reveal itself from itself. And this is what Heidegger calls the phenomenological analysis. So for us to start the investigation, we have to have some sort of intuition about what could be the action or the purpose of prospect that a tender person takes. And it could be love, for example. A tender person would be assumed or could be thought of as somebody who's capable of love or who is in love. So let's apply what I've called the purposive action here, purposive analysis here, to have an idea of whether this is the case or not, and whether or not we can uncover a certain customization about which is constitutive of tenderness. And for this purpose, we're going to have a look at Plato's Symposium. Plato's Symposium is a dialogue where a group of men sit together, drinking, trying to describe love, give praises of love, and enjoy the company of each other. Uh, Agathon, the one who is holding the party, says that here love is young, and as well as being young, he is tender. For love does not walk on the ground or on the heads, because the heads are not very soft. But in the softest things, there he moves and lives. He has set up his dwelling in the characters and souls of gods and humans. So whenever he finds a soft character, there he lodges. And from this, from the fact that he cannot dwell in any hard place, and from the fact that he dwells only in the softest characters, Agathon concludes that love is tender. Uh, so, for example, here, in this type of purposive analysis, love shows us that, for example, the person who is in love has a soft character or soul. But let's actually take this purposive analysis further, perspectival analysis further, and look into what constitutes, is it really the case that, is this really the case in general? So Socrates actually challenges this view, and he asks Agathon a very simple question: is love love of something, or is he love of nothing? And of course, Agathon agrees and says that love is love of something. But consider whether it isn't necessarily true that, and then he asks him before this, does love desire that thing which he's a love of or not? So now love is associated with desire. If I love something, I certainly desire that thing. And Socrates asks a very simple questions. If I love something and I desire it, can I desire something that I have? If I desire something that I have, and I mean, this is an absurdity. So he concludes that love is love of something that he lacks. So if love is love of beauty, love, for example, lacks beauty. Yes. But he actually presents a very good counter argument to what he's saying, where he mentions people who are strong, healthy, and rich and want to be strong, healthy, and rich. In this case, they have what they're asking for. However, they desire it, they want more. But here Socrates tells us that, or tells Agathon that, in fact, they should not say it this way. They should say that I wish I may continue to have in the future what I already have at present. So, for example, so this, in this case, it would be also lack, because I don't have it now. It's not yet available to me in the future, but I would like to have it in the future. So still, in this case, it is a lack. And then he wants to sum up the conclusions, Socrates, and says, isn't love first of something, and secondly of something that he lacks? Yes. And then surely love is love of beauty and not of ugliness. And Agathon agrees. Then the conclusion is what love lacks and does not have is beauty. Yes. So, and then Socrates goes on and he tries to describe the parentage of love, and suddenly love becomes a very different spirit or God at this point in the book. And he says he is always poor and far from being the tender and beautiful creature that most people imagine. He's in fact hard and rough, without shoes for his feet or a roof over his head. He's always sleeping on the bare ground without bedding. Now, this is a very unusual image of love, but it's an image of love that has undergone the analysis that we described before, which is what makes this act of being in love actually mine. And in this case, it would be having a lack, okay, lacking something. So the customization in this case would be having a lack. And this analysis, as we've seen, is faulty because the movement from love to tenderness does not really happen. So, and that is an example of the analysis that I am trying to propose here. But now Socrates actually goes on and mentions his dialogue with one of his few teachers, Diotima, and actually a certain different point is at hand. If you notice, before we were speaking about love, but not being in love, which is actually a mistake, because love in this context is some sort of God. or some spirit or some mystical thing that they're trying to describe. And even when Socrates is trying to describe the poverty and the roughness of love, he describes his parentage, and he describes that he is the son of the god of resourcefulness and the god and the goddess of poverty. However, if we want to fix this mistake, we would actually replace love with being in love, which is a prospect, which is a real action a human can take, a real purpose of action, that a real prospect. And he mentions the dialogue that he has with Diotima, one of his few teacher, and she asks him this question: what does the lover of beautiful things actually desire? And then he says to possess them. And then when she asks him, what do you gain from possessing beautiful things? Socrates is not able to answer and is perplexed. And then she tells him to change the word beautiful with the word good. And suddenly now he's able to answer, and he says that he will be happy. The one who desires, who loves the good things, wants to possess them because he will be happy with their possession. So the happy are happy through the possession of good things. So let's read this part here. In general, the truth is that for everyone, all desire for good things and for being happy is the most mighty love, but they are not then called lovers or said to be in love. It is only those who ardently pursue one particular form of goodness here. Because some people pursue wealth, some people pursue other different types of things, but in their lives simultaneously. So the fact that you ardently pursue one form of the good attract the terms which should belong to this whole class, which is that they alone feel love or are lovers or are in love. And Socrates agrees with this. So to actually sum up again, love is the desire to possess the good things always, to possess the good always. And the word always here is a very important part or thematic that we should be focusing on and keep in mind for later use. And then she asks him one thing. She tells him that, can you tell me what those who pursue love go about doing? What is their definitive feature? And now we're looking at a different type of analysis, whereby we are looking at the circumstance through which this act of being in love arises, the how they conduct, the way in which they receive the world, and the way in which they are within the world is now at question. It's not precisely the question that we've been asking before, which is what makes an action mine, or what makes an action has a purpose, which is a customization. Now it is how I receive the world, or how I receive a certain aspect in this world that actually makes me in love, the way in which I receive the world. And then she says that it is giving birth in the beautiful in respect of body and soul. And Socrates does not understand her and asks her to explain further. And she says that all human beings are pregnant, Socrates, in body and in soul. And when we reach maturity, it is natural that we desire to give birth. It is not possible to give birth in what is ugly, only in what is beautiful. I say that because it is something divine, this process of pregnancy and procreation. It is an aspect of immortality. And here there is a reference to what we have discussed before, which is the fact the always, the desire of God always, because it is a desire of immortality in the otherwise mortal creature. So the ardent pursuit of one thing is precisely the desire to get over one's mortality by desiring the good always. And in this way, there is a desire to achieve some type of immortality. And then she speaks of how the pregnant person, the one who is in love, approaches the beautiful. It is always in favorable mood, and it melts with joy and gives birth and procreates. And then the object of love is not, as Socrates has said, just the beautiful, but is the giving birth in the beautiful. So the situation the situation that one is put in is a situation of pregnancy, the desire to overcome mortality, okay? And the action that they end up doing is being in love or the ardent pursuit of one particular form of the good. How can this help us uncover something about tenderness, which is hypothetically there? And we don't really know what is there, what is the attunement that is responsible for this receptivity, i.e. being pregnant, or the prospect that is being taken, which is being in love. We hypothesize that it could be tenderness. But how could we know whether or not it is tender? By applying the different types of analysis that I've discussed earlier, but uh, for now, we have to look at a certain example, a certain case, a certain testimony of a lover. We might be able to unlock something. So for example, here we have Socrates in the Theaetetus saying that he's a midwife. Okay, so he helps people who are pregnant to give birth. So Socrates says here, I supervise the labor of their minds, not their bodies. And when he's asked, or when he asks himself, why do I behave like this? He says, because the God compels me to attend to the labors of others, but prohibits me from having any offspring myself. So we know from this testimony that Socrates, when he's approaching somebody to talk to him, he's actually approaching a potential lover, a potential somebody who's pregnant and who is possibly going to give birth in the beautiful. And in the symposium, I think the only one who's described as a lover is Alcibiades. Alcibiades is literally a lover of excellence who's trying to pursue Socrates and excellence at the same time. And actually now we have a certain example that we could look at and apply the analysis that we've described to actually maybe uncover what is the certain attunement behind the two different things that we're seeing, the prospect or the action that is being taken up, which is being in love or the ardent pursuit, and the pregnancy. We might uncover something about what's in between, or the attunement that encompasses both. So Alcibiades says that whenever he listens to Socrates, he's more upset than those driven to frenzy. His heart pounds and tears flow merely because of his words. Yes? His soul wasn't in turmoil before talking to Socrates, and he wasn't disturbed by the thought that he was a slave of his way of living. What he has felt in the presence of this one man is what no one would think he had it in him to feel in front of anyone, and that is shame. So now everything is melting together. Now there is tears flowing, a heart pounding, and a soul in turmoil, and there is shame and guilt. This is the situation. This is the circumstances that Socrates has put Alcibiades in. And Socrates is, and Alcibiades is a lover, so is in fact, he is pursuing the good. And in the symposium, he's actually pursuing excellence through Socrates. Now for the actual testimony that could actually give us an idea of what, in what way could we decipher this melting pot. So Alcibiades says that Socrates compels him to admit that even with all the deficiencies Alcibiades has, he nevertheless takes no care for himself. And instead, Alcibiades says, I involve myself in the concerns of the Athenians. And then he speaks about shame again. So what precedes the flowing of the tears and the pounding of the heart and the turmoil and the shame is a certain realization of the involvement in publicness. And this could be thought of as a circumstance which is substantiated as a circumstance only when Alcibiades receives it in this way, in a shameful or a guilty way. However, here we don't know what is going on. We don't know what is the customization and what is the action that is being done. But here we have an idea, and maybe if we do more circumstantial analysis, and why is this the case, we could have a better understanding of what comes later. So we have to ask this question: what does it mean to be involved in or with the public? What does it mean primordially, firstly, and for the most part, to be involved with the public? Before actually getting involved with any form of anything really, you have to be able, or a human has the capability of understanding what could be given in public, what could be given by other people, or what could be given through his own personal encounters with the world. And we can think of understanding here as uh, as this, as the genuine appropriative interpretation of significations and affordances of the objects of understanding. So what do I mean by all this? So a genuine means it is my own, and an interpretation is some sort of commitment to something as something, you know, given significations and affordances. So what something signifies is what it means in a broader context of meaning, in a broader map of meaning. And the affordances, for example, if I say that I afford or I can't afford to do something, it means that it is referring to whether or not I have the capability in me to do something. So when I try to interpret something in terms of its affordances, I am trying to understand what it affords, or what are the possibilities that could arise from a certain use of that thing. And this can only happen through interpretation, because interpretation is treating something as something, or putting it to use as something. And here there is a reference to signification, something as something, or putting it to use as something, which is a reference to affordances. You know, and it also involves a certain commitment, which is the what is reflected in the word genuine here. So now back to our question: what does it mean for me to involve myself in the public? What causes Al-Kabaides to be shameful about this realization that he's involved in the public? All of us are involved in the public, and everything is fine. We have to ask some questions before actually understanding what does it mean to be involved in the public. And the first question would be, how is the public delivered to us? The public, or publicness generally, is delivered to us in discourse, in language, in how we discuss certain ideas. So for example, let's take up the idea of success here. Success is given to us in a certain type of discourse. We have a certain idea about success given a certain linguistic discourse that the public has about this idea. But the public interpretation or the public understanding of success would not be meaningful if I don't care for it. So actually part of the involvement in the public is the curiosity, or the wanting to see the possibilities that could arise from the public understanding. So for example, if you watch a TikTok video about going to the gym, for example, and it is presented as an ideal an ideal of manliness that somebody should achieve, you feel tempted to actually see and try out the possibilities that could arise from this understanding. So in a certain way, you are curious about this type of interpretation that is being given in the public sphere through discourse. However, anybody can say anything about success or going to the gym. People could tell you different things, contradicting things. That is part of the public discourse. It is groundless and it is ambiguous. So combining all three of those, you have an understanding of what it means to be involved in the public. There is a certain discourse that you care for, that you're curious about the possibilities that could come out of this discourse, but this discourse is actually also ambiguous. And this is a entirely Heideggerian analysis. So yes, idle talk, which is the way in which public understanding is delivered in discourse. Curiosity is the tendency towards seeing the possibilities that could arise from this understanding. And ambiguity, which is the fact that anything could be said about anything that is being discussed in public discourse, which is the structure of the groundlessness of this discourse. Together characterize the way in which, in an everyday manner, man is essentially an embodiment of what is shown to him or her in the world. In these, there is revealed the basic kind of being which belongs to everydayness. We call this the existential falling of man. So, given this analysis, given this absorption that we're discussing in the public life, what Alcibiades is realizing is the fact that he's falling in the world. But what exactly is falling? We can think of falling, or Heidegger thinks of falling as tempting tranquility. What does it? What does this mean? What is the tempting part, and what is the tranquilizing part about falling in the public world? The tempting part is, in fact, the combination between the way in which the public understands and the way in which this public understanding is delivered to you in discourse, and the fact that you're curious about it. These two combined construct a temptation. You're tempted to take on the possibilities that are provided in this way. But the tranquility is the combination of the other two, of idle talk and ambiguity. In idle talk and ambiguity, having seen everything, having understood everything, they've developed the supposition that what has been shown or disclosed to man through the public sphere's understanding and interpretation can guarantee that all the possibilities of its being will be secure, genuine, and full. It is a promise of order, a promise of happiness, and a promise of, and if we think about success, for example, it functions in that exact way. You're given ideas about success through public discourse. You're tempted to see the possibilities. You're curious about the possibilities, and yet it's so ambiguous and groundless that you find yourself fallen into it, tempted into following into it, but actually it gives you some sense of confidence or some sense of tranquility resulting from the fact that we have as the public, we have seen all the possibilities and we have understood everything and we know everything. And if you take up this, there's a promise of order, for example. But however, it's not just tranquility. You end up being in some sort of hustle, okay? Because this tranquility in this type of inauthentic being, which is being fallen into the world, into the publicness, it does not seduce one to stagnation and activity, but drives one into uninhabited hustle. The ones who we see work the hardest are the ones who accept the public ideas the hardest. So, for example, if I really believe or I really accept the idea that, for example, going to the gym or working out would actually actualize some sort of idea of success, I'm gonna work super hard and I'm gonna keep on hustling. And this aggravates the falling. The tempting tranquilization actually aggravates the falling. And the movement of this human existence into its own being, into the fact that it's being fallen into some sort of public sphere, is called a downward plunge. You're always already falling and you're always already absorbed in some sort of public understanding and a desire to take on the possibilities resulting from this public understanding, yet it's so groundless and ambiguous. And generally, this downward plunge is structured by a turbulence, an unrestfulness that characterizes this falling. Back to Alcibiades. So Alcibiades involves himself in the affairs of the Athenians. And in this involvement, suddenly the realization of this involvement brings trouble, brings turmoil, brings tears, and brings unusual heart rate and other things, as we have described here. But actually, if we try and look into what Diotima, for example, has described when she says that, so at this birth, i.e. giving birth, i.e. being in love, beauty takes the role of fate. And for this reason, whenever the pregnant being approaches the beautiful, it is in favorable mood. It melts with joy. But we don't see joy in in the case of Alcibiades. We see melting, but we don't see joy. But if we actually read the dialogue, you will see that Alcibiades is moved by a certain potentiality of joy. And it is exemplified in the fact that he wants to gratify or to be gratified by Socrates. So there is an idea of joy lurking behind this melting, you know, even though we see turmoil. And now this is his own testimony. And he says that before speaking to Socrates, he wasn't disturbed by the thought that he was a slave to my own living, to his own way of living. And this actually also describes the transition between falling and the sudden realization that one is falling, and the feeling of guilt or shame, and the feeling that one is enslaved to their way of living. Now, this last quote, which is an explanation of the concept of anxiety in the Heidegger lexicon, the author is saying anxiety reveals that whatever ends one exists toward can collapse and stop making sense. That is exactly what Alcibiades is experiencing. He has been brought to actually understand this by Socrates. In what manner? In the way in which the possibilities that Alcibiades was taking up are actually just public, inauthentic, groundless interpretations. You know, and suddenly he realizes some sort of guilt that he's involved in this and that he does not take care of himself. And I would like to go back. I nevertheless take no care for myself. This is insightful. He takes no care of himself. There is nothing genuine about his understanding. You know, understanding should be genuine. However, the fact that he's involved in some sort of publicness, takes him away from this genuine nature or genuine responsibility, the responsibility of being genuine. And that is why he feels guilt. But I want us to actually to just focus on this part and stop making sense. So actually Heidegger describes understanding as some sort of the creation of sense or the coming of sense. And in this way, an anxiety reveals that what the ends that one exists towards, so the possibilities that one has taken up in the public life could possibly just be nothing, be groundless. The realization of this possibility is an anxiety. And this is the realization of this possibility this is the possibility of the impossibility of any particular comportment or any existing. It is the possibility of complete nullity. It is the possibility that everything that is being described here is just could not be. And this impossibility is precisely death. You know, there is an idea of death, or the fact that any end that we can be existing towards could be just nothing. That takes us back to the idea that Diotima was trying to actually describe when she says that the mortal being pursuing the good wants immortality. In a sense, the lover is the one realizing a certain type of fallenness, the proximity of impossibility, i.e. the mortality or death. And in this realization, there is a certain pursuit of what is immortal in the ardent pursuit of the good, in the giving birth, in the beautiful or in the good. And finally, this is described as some sort of vulnerability, the anxiety or the realization that any end that somebody could be existing towards could be nothing, the possibility of impossibility again. And this is some type of vulnerability. But now we see here two themes. ardent pursuit, which could be described as, determined, يعني a determined firmness, purposefulness, resoluteness, and the lostness or the absorption or the involvement in the affairs of the public. And here in the middle here, Socrates brings Alcibiades from here to here. But what exactly is in this white space? There is tears flowing, of course, and there is heart pounding, and there is shame, and there is guilt, and there is all of this. But what exactly is this? We're speaking about a realization of mortality per se, or realization of the possibility of impossibility. And this is precisely what is at hand here. The existential interpretation of death exhibits a fundamental vulnerability of the purposive structures that human existence presses into. So the purposive structure precisely means the purposeful actions, the fact that, for example, I'm going to go to the gym to achieve some sort of success, this, that the human existence presses into this manner of taking up possibilities, is threatened by death. And the realization or the existential interpretation of death exhibits this vulnerability, that all of this could be just nothing. An authentic human existence embraces its possibilities guiltily. Again, guilt here or shame that Alcibiades is made to realize, and therefore understands itself as fundamentally responsible for them. Such an embrace of death and guilt is hard to reconcile with ordinary experiences. That is why there is turmoil. So on one hand, we have an embrace of death, an embrace of one's mortality, the realization of one's mortality, as Diotima tries to explain. And there is guilt. There is the feeling responsible for I don't know for what, but for being authentic or for caring for oneself. This is the thing that makes Alcibiades feel some sort of shame. Heidegger himself calls this being towards this an outlandish demand. A demand that is out of this world. And this characterizes the white spot here, the white line here between being lost and being resolute. It's Unheimlichkeit, unhomeliness. The fact that you don't feel at home, the fact that you realize that every possibility could be an impossibility, the realization of death or mortality, and yes, Heidegger describes here, or the lexicon again, describes, says we must take ourselves back from the anyone, which means like the public sphere or publicness, which we do by hearing the call of conscience and choosing ourselves. Again, this gives us back, flashbacks from Alcibiades when he's saying that he does not care for himself, when Socrates makes him realize that he does not care for himself. Or we must experience an anxiety, which could be what Alcibiades is feeling when his heart pounds, his soul is in turmoil, and his tears flow, which makes manifest our freedom for choosing and grasping ourselves, and thus brings us before the authenticity of our own being. The fact that one should care for himself or create his or her own genuine understanding. And anxiety reveals that whatever ends, we've read this before, the possibility of the impossibility of any particular comportment, any existing, which is vulnerability. So now, to tie everything together, we have a realization of fallenness and the absorption in public sphere, and not caring for oneself, the realization that I don't care for myself. And then we have the ardent pursuit of the good, which defines being in love. And in between, we have implicitly done the analysis that I was describing earlier. And we have come to realize that a certain person who is in love, the attunement that is responsible for all of this, the receptivity and the accustomization, are both respectively being vulnerable and being anxious. When you receive the world, when you receive the fact that you're fallen in the world, when this realization comes forth, and when this realization of the fact that I am not genuinely understanding the world, I'm fallen into the public understanding, fallen. causes some sort of vulnerability, the realization that all possibilities could be impossible. The fact that any comportment, any use, any affordance, any existing that I've taken up could actually be just nothing. And that is the being towards death causes some sort of vulnerability. And then the anxiety causes the resoluteness, because anxiety is in fact the way in which purposive action is taken forth. And the anxiety is the thing which reveals this receptivity, this vulnerability. Anxiety is what reveals vulnerability. Yes, and could we call this vulnerability and anxiety, this attunement, this human condition of being vulnerable and anxious, being tender? That's a question for discussion. But before this, I would like to show you an 8-minute clip if we have some time. We have time.
Neiman. Maybe it's time to finally bring this home. What do you say? Show me. Don't slow down. Pick it up. Neiman, you earned the part. Alternates, you want to clean the blood off my drum set? Okay, we can start now. Five PM call tomorrow in Denellen. Give yourselves at least 2 hours to get there from the city this time, all right? Save your travel receipts. Or don't. I don't give a shit.
Hey, excuse me, you know where the cabs are?
No, you gotta call the cab.
I know, but they said the cab's supposed to be right here.
No, you gotta call them. Then they're gonna take forever.
Okay, how do I get to Hard Road? Hey, come on, please, come on, you're still open. You're still open. Come on, come on. Come on. Yeah, hello?
Where the fuck are you, man? Call time was 5.
I know, I'm almost there. I'm right there.
We're on stage at 20.
I know we're on stage at 20.
That punch just got Connolly warming up.
God, fucking, okay, you just tell that little fucking redhead I'm gonna be there, okay? Fuck. Hey, certainly.
Well, glad you could fit us into your busy schedule, darling.
I know, look, I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm here, I'm ready to go.
Connolly's playing the part.
Yeah, like fucking hell, he's playing my part.
What the fuck did you just say to me?
It's my part.
It's my part, and I decide who to lend it to. Usually it's somebody that has fucking sticks.
I left him in the car. I'll be right back. But take me 5 minutes.
I'm warming up the band now.
Look, I can use Ryan's sticks. It's
Neiman,
okay.
you lost the fucking part.
No, I didn't. Look, you can't fucking do this to me.
Can't?
Yeah.
When did you become a fucking expert on what I can or cannot do, you fucking weepy willow shit sack?
I earned that part.
You never earned anything. God, you are a self-righteous prick. The only reason you're a fucking core is because you misplaced a folder. The only reason you're in studio band to begin with is because I told you exactly what I'd be asking for in Nassau. Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, I'm in studio band because I'm the
Hey, why
best
don't
player.
you just back
Yo,
off, bro?
fuck off, Johnny Utah. Turn my pages, bitch.
Hey, I can cut you any fucking time I want.
You would have cut me, Ryan.
Try me, you fucking weasel. At 5:30, that's in exactly 11 minutes. My band is on stage. If your ass is not on that stool with your own fucking sticks in hand, or if you make one fucking mistake, one, I will drum your ass back to Nassau where you can turn pages until you graduate or fucking drop out. By the time you're done at Schaefer, you're gonna make Daddy look like a fucking success story. Got it? Or we can let Johnny Utah play the part. You choose.
That's my part. I'll be on your stage.
You got 10 minutes, you fucking pathetic pansy ass fruit fuck.
Hey, tell Fletcher I'm coming.
What the fuck's taking you so long, man? We're moving on stage, right?
I know, I got locked in my car. It's fine. I got locked in my car. I'm coming.
Left turn 200 feet.
Are you driving, man?
No.
What the hell was that noise?
Okay, look, why don't you just tell Fletcher that I'm coming, you motherfucker?
Hey, are you okay? Are you okay?
Yeah, I gotta get my stick.
No, stay away from the car. I'm calling 911. Okay,
It's a couple more blocks.
No, sir, you don't have to go anywhere.
Blocks.
Sir,
Let's get off.
sir, no, you don't have to.
Yes. So now this is Unheimlichkeit in its most whorish form. Neiman could be seen as somebody who is similar to Alcibiades, who is brought to feel vulnerability and anxiety regarding whether or not his possibility, the possibility that he's trying to take up, which is being, the next big drummer in the world, could actually cease to exist. And he's filled with this vulnerability, and he's filled with anxiety. And you can see how far it goes. There is no place to which he feels, comfortable or is fallen into. He's consumed by his vulnerability and anxiety. And he exemplifies an ardent pursuit of excellence in the same way Alcibiades does, maybe more. And actually, there is also another correspondence or another parallelism between Fletcher, which is the maestro or the instructor, and Socrates. Socrates was tried for death, and Fletcher was kicked out of the school. And both were trying to bring about some sort of sense. Both were trying to bring about Alcibiades and Neiman outside or away from their falling in the world. And actually, Fletcher tells Neiman one time that the worst thing anybody could say to a young drummer or a young musician or anything is good job. And good job exemplifies some sort of falling in the world, exemplifies an absorption, exemplifies a certain public idea of a good, a certain tendency that one has to be good, and a certain ambiguity to what being good or good job means. Yes, and that is basically what I had to say. Yes, so thank you for coming, everybody. Yes, thank you so much for coming. And I want to thank the professor specifically for coming, especially Professor Switzer. He's the one who familiarized me with all of these concepts. So thank you very much, Dr. Switzer. Yes, of course, of course.
Test.
I feel maybe my sensibility was too tender for that film. So let me sort of gather some thoughts. It was a very interesting way to take things, to show us that. It's a very intense, I haven't seen it before, so I really want to see more of it. But a brilliant talk. I think you put together things wonderfully. It's wonderful to see original philosophical thought, drawing together on different themes and pushing things in the direction that you are. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to pick up on that the issue that I think the predominant word of vulnerability, and just share. I mean, I think the best reaction to a philosophical work like this is to sort of try to respond and carry it a little further, carry my own thoughts in response. So I don't really have a question so much as just a few ideas that I'd like to hear you
Of course.
respond to.
Yes.
Yeah, the issue of vulnerability in particular, I mean, what comes to mind is, the Cartesian ego, which is really protected away from the world, isolated from the world, and has a kind of invulnerable view of representations and keeps that distance. And I think that Heidegger in many ways is addressing that. We're thrown into the world. At the same time, there's a safety in the fallenness into Das Man. We get a kind of invulnerability in our forgetfulness of our finitude and our mortality, in just being, the strength of the they, that we can judge and speak and believe what they believe and so on. And so obviously we're, to be brought back to our vulnerability is really the essence of all this. And I was also thinking about tenderness, and you can look at someone in a tender way, but I think the word itself very much has to do with touch. And when something is, I mean, one of the ways we use the word tender is after an injury, and we'd say, oh, no, it's very tender, so it's very sensitive. So I think the word itself speaks to a tremendous amount of sensitivity. And I think that when we try to touch someone or look or whatever, but approach someone in a tender way, there's a sense in which we're ahead of ourselves and already feeling what is an appropriate touch, as opposed to this kind of, a brusque, a push. And that movie had a lot of push in it, So, I mean, there wasn't much tenderness in their interaction, but there was a kind of tough love, and I appreciate taking in that direction. But I guess I'm just interested in whether or not there is, in our engagement, in our, in the word attunement as well, there's a sense of reciprocity. There's a sense in which we are responding to a situation. We're not, that there is a kind of vulnerability. There's a kind of sensitivity that, goes against that toughness and that the demanding element. So I'm just interested in what your thoughts are about, to go back to tenderness and whether or not, and I guess basically my question is, why did you decide to end with that particular movie clip? And how does that, because there is not much tenderness in the relationship that we're seeing there.
Yes, yes.
And so, is there a sense in which there is a need for a kind of tact, a kind of tactile sense of connection that is perhaps something that, I guess that's what I wanted to add to the discussion. I think the themes you brought up of vulnerability and interconnection and taking up the situation, and certainly facing our finitude, all the pieces are there. But I guess I just wanted to push in a kind of Merleau-Pontian
yeah.
way, the reciprocity of touch. When we touch something, it touches us back.
Mm.
So that's the theme that I want to end on. If there's a question in there, it has to do with me.
Yes. yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you so much for your beautiful insights. And I think, I have a certain response, but I think that the points that have been raised here are entirely accurate to what I had in mind. But my response would be that it's not actually contradicting what I have shown, because we are not trying to have any talk about a totalizing feature that is characteristic of tenderness. Precisely, we are trying to have what Heidegger calls a formal indication. And in this sense, we're trying to look at the form of tenderness without associating it with any sort of imagery or anything that we can theorize about from outside. So, for example, when you're mentioning Merleau-Ponty, he's saying that when we touch something, something touches us back. There is a talk, or there is non-formal talk, a talk of content right now. And the thing that actually binds this idea of tenderness that is being mentioned by Merleau-Ponty, and thankfully to Dr. Switzer, and what I've been showing is the structure of being gripped away from a certain invulnerability. And this invulnerability is exemplified in this movie by the fact that he does not want to tell him that he is doing a good job, by the fact that he's testing his limits. And he causes a certain vulnerability and a certain anxiety that shapes this whole thing. And actually that takes us to the question on whether or not what we're discussing is tenderness. I'm leaving this open. It could be not tenderness. And the title of the talk is Philosophizing Tenderness, not a philosophy of tenderness, because we are not trying to understand, I'm not trying to come at a definitive answer or a definitive totalizing non-formal indication of what it is. It's rather formal discussion in a phenomenological way, in a way that, I've described the circumstantial analysis and the prospectival analysis, in which we come to see the both two aspects of attunement and how do they come forth given a certain involvement in the world. But actually, he's touching on the world, sir. He's touching his own world in a very genuine way. That is the point about inauthenticity. He's touching it very hard on, he's deeply involved with it, and he's responding to its solicitations in a genuine way, in the way the solicitations of being a great drummer, in a genuine way. And he's brought to this genuinity by Fletcher, by being pushed very far into the thing. And that is the parallel between him and Alcibiades. And we see people responding to those two, who suspend the ethical and do whatever they need to do to actually bring lovers away from their fallenness, away from the public understanding, how society punishes them. Fletcher was punished, and Socrates was punished by death. Literally, he was punished by death. Socrates was killed by the Athenian people for precisely what he's doing to Alcibiades. He makes him question his public understanding, the involvement. Alcibiades is brought to tears and he's in turmoil. And maybe this is not tenderness, but our analysis has brought us this far. And this is all I could say, Yani. But the question is up for grabs. Is this a tenderness? Is this receptive? Is this attunement of being receptive and anxious of being vulnerable and anxious. Actually, tenderness. That is a question, yeah.
I just have one more thing two more things to add. One, Alcibiades was, of course, ultimately, frustrated in his love. Socrates wasn't going to play along, It's like, oh, let's talk about philosophy more, So one feels a little sorry for Alcibiades. But the other thing I wanted to quickly say is that, yeah, anxiety is very important for Heidegger and being in time, certainly. But I believe that it's in the introduction to metaphysics where he says that there are other ways in which, and he mentions boredom, which is, but he also mentions, and this is the kind of thing that one wishes Heidegger would have paid a little more attention to. He says something like the love for another person, or the genuine love for another person. So, I mean, I guess that's the issue that I think that pursuing tenderness and pursuing the theme of love, I think is a really positive phenomenological direction that hasn't really been looked at. And maybe in a sense, I mean, certainly the sense of our mortality and the horizon of a beyond mortality that you brought in nicely through this is really important. But, maybe we need to put anxiety aside and embrace this direction of tenderness and love as a new possibility. I mean, that's where I think that it could easily come out of where you were going. So
Definitely,
that's-
there are different criticisms, even when he speaks about call of conscience as the prerequisite, for ripping yourself out of the day. I mean, conscience in most of us is actually a representation maybe of what the public dictates. So if, for example, your conscience feels good if you do what your mother is saying, for example. And this is this is a different there could be a different understanding of the word conscience is in this analysis. And there could be a different way in which this authenticity comes to being other than an anxiety. But I think this is could be the way in which Heidegger himself as a person, as Dasein, came to to these conclusions. Thank you very much for the points. Amazing.
And thank you. I want to pass the microphone to someone. Where is she?
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. I
Thank you,
found
sir.
this a very creative way of thinking through these topics. My question, I think I'm moving in the same sort of trajectory that Dr. Switzer was moving as far as where my questioning is headed. So my question, I have two sort of closely interrelated questions. One, would you say that you had sort of an ethical motivation for looking into this matter in the first place? And two, and I think this is the more important of those, or more to the point anyway, do you think that there is some sort of privileged connection between the other person and this kind of, we'll call it tenderheartedness that you're dealing with? So is tenderheartedness that I somehow come to all on my own, if that's possible, or not all on my own, but maybe other things could inspire it. Is that really tenderheartedness or what we're trying to get at here? Or is there something specific about the other person and there's this sort of necessarily ethical dimension to this tenderheartedness, or to whether it's for Heidegger and its authenticity, I don't want to make you take a stance on Heidegger in particular, but are you thinking, yes, there's some element here that specifically has to do with the other person that's triggering this whole motion? Yes, go ahead.
Actually, this is an amazing question, and I wanted to include something that is that responds to it in my talk, but for time management purposes. So authenticity, or the idea of authenticity that you're mentioning, that Heidegger comes up with, is actually a derivative of Kierkegaardian, particularization, the actualization of the individual or the particular. And this is actually amazing that you're mentioning it, because for Kierkegaard, it is faith. It is faith that brings about this, and faith is precisely this paradox that you're trying to get away from the universal, the particular, from the ethical, and yet the calling comes in the form of a universal too, and you're gazing at another universal, the absolute. And in this somehow the particular comes to be a true individual. And the story of Abraham is the one used to actually illustrate this point. And I was going to do this. And I was going to say that actually it's not, and I actually have the slides. It is not the call of conscience per se, but it's a call for prayer. It's precisely the fact that you're pulled away from your fallenness, you know, by, you know, for example, when the Muslim call of prayer happens, you're pulled away from your work, from the way you're involved in the world, from every idea, and you go to pray and remember death. And remember the possibility and the proximity of death and the fact that all of what you're doing could come to an end. And there is an ethical sense to it. The realization of the possibility of impossibility lies at the heart of prayer, for example. And the story of Abraham discusses this ethical dimension. Before having Isaac, before keeping Isaac, he had to, you know, fight with his fate or create his own fate or have an encounter with fate, which is the possibility of losing Isaac. And actually the Ayutima mentions the idea of fate. The beauty in this birth comes forward as fate. So thank you very much for discussing this. It definitely has an ethical dimension. And I think precisely the context within which Being and Time was written in, there was, you know, some sort of looking down upon a religious tradition or trying to break away from some sort of religious explanation of existence. And in that way, the original idea that came from, for example, Kierkegaard, is taken into an unreligious call for conscience or anxiety or stuff or other things. But yes, at the heart of it, at the origin of this idea is faith. And faith embodies an ethical stance on the world in a lot of cases. So thank you so much. I can say thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks, Khaled. So I just wanted to ask about anxiety for a second. So it strikes me, and I think this is also kind of in line with what Dr. Switzer was saying, that the movie displays, and I've seen the movie, the movie throughout displays this kind of this relationship of mutual hatred, in a sense, between these people, and there's something highly toxic actually about their relationship. And when I see this scene in particular, I think that there's something that in everyday language we would call anxiety happening here. But in Heidegger, he sometimes talks about anxiety as though it's a kind of stillness, or it's not a frenzied sort of phenomenon, right? It's something that, you know, so I'm wondering in the case of Tenderness, how you think anxiety should manifest. I mean, there is this kind of, it seems like there's maybe it's a condition of its possibility that we have a moment of anxiety. But what does that look like exactly in the I don't know, in life, in the Tenderness itself? Because it seems here that what happens, in a way, you could even think of what the character here, I forget his name, is going through, is actually a kind of transposition of anxiety into fear, right? Because fear, you know, is actually, for Heidegger, is something that anxiety is a kind of a presupposition of fear, but fear is a more, it can turn into fear. It can become fearfulness in life, right? And I feel like that might be what's going on here. He starts to actually think, he's aware that he can lose this part. He's aware he could lose these, but then it becomes this race to get the equipment, and the race to get back and to prove this music director wrong and all this stuff, right? Sorry, yeah, if you could just.
Of course, I think this is a really great point. Thank you. I think something that Heidegger actually points out to, which is that authentic being is also fallen, is also falling. So there is yani design or being there, or the existential structure of a human being is always already falling in the world, and authenticity is some way of seizing upon it. So in a sense, this movie would include precisely what you just did, you know, drawing the lines of what is just further falling and what is authentic anxiety. And authentic anxiety actually comes up in Heidegger when he speaks about resoluteness or anticipatory resoluteness, which is the fact that you're aware that everything could, go away, but there is this genuine understanding, the anxiety to actually take up a certain authentic possibility to achieve or to arrive at selfhood or rather a genuine understanding of the world. And this comes first in the purpose of anticipatory resoluteness or the firmness of purpose. So in a way, Neiman's purposefulness and continuation to ardently pursue the excellence that he's trying to pursue is anxious. But however, there is some fear involved and there is some inauthenticity involved. And this is by virtue of him being a human being that is falling in the world. And there is, for example, what does it I earned by my part mean? When he says I earned my part, and then he says that this is my part and I give it to whomever, and then the other guy says, don't do whatever. So this is an exemplification of fallenness. There is idle talk. There is a public understanding of earning a part. There is anybody could say anything, and Neiman is still tending to these interpretations, these public understandings. So in his firmness to actually be the perfect drummer or the next big thing, he is also fallen in some other discourse, fallen in some sort of publicness. And this is precisely right. It turns into fear and it turns into other things. But actually, Heidegger, I think, gives an account for this by saying that authentic design is always actually falling, and he's just seizing upon the falling. Authentic design seizes upon the falling. Yes. That answer the question?
Yeah, that helps. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Khaled, for the brilliant talk. But I have a small question. This is not my specialty, if I have any by any means, but and my question might be naive. But there's a method in philosophy, that's called like vi negativa, where we analyze the thing by analyzing its opposite. And in the scenes you showed us, and we're talking about tenderness as the form of vulnerability itself, and the scene where they were not as tender as one might say. There's this roughness or callousness within the act itself. Tenderness doesn't feel tender anymore within the definitions that we put for it. So do you think that tenderness has kind of a similar definition to its opposite, its counterpart, the roughness itself, because both kind of intersect within the scene that you showed us? So what do you think?
So thank you for your question. It's a very good question. But again, I'll tell you what I told Dr. Switzer before about the analysis being an analysis that aims at a formal indication. And when you speak of the opposite, you're speaking of content. But when we're speaking of form or the formal indication that this analysis tries, the phenomenological formal indication, we're trying to understand in something without external theorization, without it being occurrent or present at hand. It's some sort of readiness to hand. It's some sort of, usability and involvement, direct involvement with what, and that's why we started by love, by being in love as a prospective action that we might associate somebody who's tender by doing or by taking up. So when you're saying that maybe it's similar to its opposite, I think this is completely misguided, given the fact that, a consciousness of the opposite includes a consciousness of the content of what or a knowledge of the content of what we're discussing. However, we're speaking about a formal structure. I think, as far as I understand what the word formal indication means in the body of in the work either. But yes, in what way is it a formal structure, or in what way is a formal indication? In the way that it is a prerequisite, a primordial prerequisite for all possibility. So, for example, you could be tender by being soft, for example, and you would still be anxious and vulnerable. You could be tender by doing what Neiman is doing, by being this, So we're not analyzing content. We're aiming at, a formal indication. And that is actually a point that shows or expresses the success of this goal, which is the fact that, you're unsure what is the content of this tenderness. You're completely unsure. It could be anything, you know. But whether or not these are the formal structures of it, it's another question that we could ask, and we'd have to go through the same, you know, heavy lifting of the analysis that Heidegger is doing, you know. Yes, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Any more questions? Thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you in our next talks. And yeah, thank you again.